So I was watching The Odd Couple with Rob Parker and Chris Broussard, and they were talking about how people talk about Michael Jordan's competition in the playoffs and in the finals, and people try to make it seem like they were not great teams that he faced, or how the competition he had was not as great as the competition LeBron has had. And they said some things that I completely disagreed with, and they also made some points, but I want to talk about some.
Now, he had himself, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. Three of the top 10 players in the league at that time. All in their primes.
So they start off by saying when LeBron went to the Heat, LeBron, D. Wade, and Bosh were all top 10 players in the NBA, which is not true whatsoever. Because you can make the argument D. Wade was a top 10 player when in like 2011, 2012, and maybe 2013. But you cannot say Chris Bosh was a top 10 player in the NBA when he was playing with the Heat. Chris Bosh made all NBA team one time, and I think it was 2007, and he made second team. He never made all NBA teams when he was with LeBron and them. So don't try to make it seem like Chris Bosh was a top 10 player, because he was not. Because that's just facts. He wasn't. But if you want to make the argument LeBron played with great players, who was Jordan playing with? Was Scottie Pippen not a great player? Because if I remember correctly, Scottie Pippen, for the 6 years they went to the finals, 5 of those years he made all NBA teams. And even when Jordan went to go play baseball, he made all NBA first teams those 2 years. You could go look it up. And if you want to talk about playing with great players, LeBron's 9 trips to the finals, there was 4 times where somebody that's playing with him made all NBA teams. Kyrie made it in 2015, and he made third team. And they should have won those finals if Kyrie didn't go down. And Kevin Love, I don't think, was playing those finals. 2013, D-Wade made third team. They won that finals. 2012, D-Wade made third team. They won that finals. 2011, D-Wade made second team. And they should have won those finals if LeBron showed up. And that's just facts.
They always say, oh, the Pistons were old. Go back and look. They weren't 35 years old or whatever. You know, like They're making it like they were Joe and Isaiah
Joe was
played 15
relatively
years.
young.
Yes, they were still young. They were not old.
And this is something I agree with. That 91 Pistons team was not an old team whatsoever. I think they were like 29, 30. That's not an old team whatsoever.
They were not old. Sure, were they the same when they started the run, Chris, 3 years before? No. But they weren't old by any stretch of the imagination.
And this is something I agree with. That was not the Pistons team from 88 or 90 or 89, but this was still a really good team. And if you look at from 88 to 91, when they finally lost to the Bulls, in 91 they had their worst record. And also Isaiah Thomas, who I think everybody agrees was their best player, missed from January until like a couple weeks before the playoffs started because he broke his wrist, and many people believed he was going to miss the entire season.
Chicago, with Derrick Rose
and nobody.
who else? Right.
Nobody.
Bunch of role players. Carlos Boozer had seen his better years. You know, pretty good player. Made a couple All-Star teams.
Noah was on that team, wasn't he?
Joakim Noah, good role player. You
they
know,
were all
Luol
right.
Deng,
But
good
there's no Hall of Famers in that group.
Right.
So what are they talking about?
So would you rather have Derrick Rose and a bunch of role players or Patrick Ewing and a bunch of role players?
And Patrick.
All right, so that Bulls team was a really good team, and I don't think they were one of the greatest teams ever. And I agree with, they had Derrick Rose and a bunch of really good role players. That's something I agree with. But if you look at the Knicks that you guys always admire and try to make it seem like they were one of the greatest teams we've ever seen, they had Patrick Ewing and a bunch of good role players. So when you ask, would you rather have a team with a bunch of role players and Patrick Ewing, or a team with a bunch of role players and Derrick Rose? Well, in 2011, Derrick Rose won MVP. Patrick Ewing never did. And if you look at Derrick Rose, he would have been a Hall of Famer, if you're being real, and everybody knows this. If he didn't have those injuries, Derrick Rose would be a Hall of Famer. So when you say, oh, would you rather have a team led by Patrick Ewing or Derrick Rose? Well, Derrick Rose in 2011 was a great player. And I'd agree Patrick Ewing is a greater player than Derrick Rose. That's not what I'm trying to argue. But 2011 Derrick Rose was also a great player. Carlos Boozer was not past his prime or anything. Carlos Boozer in 2011 was averaging 17 points, and he was 29. So he's not like some old guy that was just bullshitting and not doing anything. He was very important to that team.
Something out, because people are saying Look at that Knicks team. They took Jordan 7. Who'd they have other than Patrick Ewing? John Starks, Charles Oakley, Derek Harper.
And I like how you guys talk about John Starks and Charles Oakley and Anthony Mason as if they're much greater than Luol Deng or Carlos Boozer or Joakim Noah, because they're not. Those are very comparable players. They're in the same league. They're in the same level. They're great as role players, but they're not anything special. Those are very comparable players.
That Boston team, while not ancient and old with Kevin Garnett, Ray Allen, and Paul Pierce, I think we can equate them to the Pistons when Jordan beat them.
Yes.
Is that fair?
That's fair.
The 2011 Celtics were not the 2008 Celtics that won the championship. I'd agree with that. But I would also say that team had 2 first-team all-defensive players in KG and Rondo, and they also had 4 All-Stars. So, as you could say, they're comparable to the 91 Pistons, but I'm leaning towards the Celtics. But there's not a big gap or there's no difference between them.
Paul George emerged as a star, but it was still Roy Hibbert, Lance Stevenson, George Hill. Right, Rob? I mean, that's what it was.
Let's just be honest.
Right. They won 60 games in today's NBA.
All right, those Pacers team were not great. I'd agree with that. But what about the 92 Eastern Conference Finals when the Bulls played against the Cavs with Larry Nance and Mark Price? Those are great players. That's a great team. I mean, I could use the same argument because that Cavs team was not anything special. The Pacers with Paul George and David West is not anything amazing, but the Cavs aren't either.
What was the great team that LeBron?
The Oklahoma City team was young, right?
Right.
In the final, they were babies. They weren't great yet.
Right. So we're.
All right, let's say that the 2012 Thunder were young because KD was 23, Russ was 23, and Harden was also 22. But if you say that, then keep the same energy for the 96 fucking Magic that the Bulls beat because Shaq was 23 and Penny was 24.
Say he didn't because you look at the 92 and 93 Knicks, they were coached by Pat Riley. The 96 Magic, Shaq and Penny, who just made the finals the year before.
And I also like how you guys don't talk about 95 when Penny and Shaq, when they were 23 and 22. Shaq was 22 that year. They beat the fucking Bulls, and you guys never mention that.
The Dallas team he lost to wasn't some super great team. Am I right?
No. People like, what? They couldn't believe that Dallas won that championship.
Right.
So if the Mavs in 2011 were not anything special when they came off from beating the fucking Lakers that won the championship the year before and they swept them, that was not a great team. I'd agree with you. But in 96, the Supersonics was not a great team. They had Gary Payne and Sean Kemp as their 2 best players. That's not a great team whatsoever. In 92, the Trailblazers that were in the finals, that was a great team with Clyde and Terry Porter. That's a great team. But you guys love hyping up all Michael Jordan and 6-0 in the finals. Yeah, and he beat Clyde. And who else was it? Are you going to tell me Terry Porter was a great player? I mean, you can criticize LeBron's Eastern Conference competition, and we hear the narrative, and LeBron has been to 8 finals because he's played in a weak Eastern Conference. But you guys never talk about who Jordan was playing against, because Jordan was playing against the Pacers with Reggie Miller and Rick Smits and Jalen Rose. I mean, that's a good team. That's not anything special. But you guys talk about, Jordan was going through the hardest era, and even the greatest teams Michael Jordan has played. It was the Celtics and the Bad Boy Pistons. And the Bad Boy Pistons beat him 3 times, and he beat him 1 time in 91. And they never went back. The next year, I think they lost to the Knicks. And the Celtics with Larry Bird in them, he never beat them. They beat him twice. Matter of fact, they swept them twice. And he never beat them. So if you're going to say LeBron played in a weak Eastern Conference, and that's why he made 8 straight NBA Finals, then talk about who Jordan was playing against. Because he wasn't playing against anything special either. If in that case,
Duncan was past
the team
his
that's
prime
lined up
when he beat them, right?
All right, so the Spurs were an old team when Tim Duncan was like 36, 35. But the Jazz were not an old team when Stockton was 34 and 35, and Karl Malone was 34 or 35, and Jeff Hornacek was like 34. That's not an old team. But the Spurs were an old team when they have Tony Parker and Manu and Tim Duncan in their 30s. That's an old team. But the Jazz team, you guys love to praise and say, oh, that team should have won a finals. That team deserved a ring. But that was not an old team when Jordan was beating them. I mean, just keep the same energy for everybody. Because if you're going to say that team was old, then the Jazz team was old. And I'll fuck with Rob and Chris. But come on. Keep the same energy. Because it sounds like you guys are hyping up Jordan and then trying to talk about LeBron's competition. And this is something you guys do all the time. Oh, LeBron played in a weak Eastern Conference, and that's why he made 8 straight finals. All right, then let's talk about who Jordan played. Because you guys try to make it seem like Reggie Miller and Jalen Rose and Rick Smith were hot shit, but they're not. If we're being real, they're not. That was a decent team, but they're not anything special. Just keep the same energy for everybody.